Hi, Chaz Kangas here for Speak Minneapolis, and I am joined today with someone who has done an incredible feat of resurrecting outright, not just preservation, but saving a one-of-a-kind, unique auteur piece of 80s cult cinema. I'm speaking, of course, with the great Nicholas McCarthy, who has helped bring to life the wonderful Severin release of the unforgettable Student Confidential. Nicholas, how you doing today?
I'm good. Nice to meet you, Chaz.
Nice to meet you too. So, while this is our first time speaking, and you and I have never spoken before, in Zoom or in person, any sort of way, I do want to point out because you have your podcast, the Vanity Project podcast, that detailed the resurrection of Student Confidential, and you mentioned some early 2000s eBay attempts with Student Confidential. So,
Yeah.
we may have interacted possibly twice before. One of which is for this, my own personal early 80s copy of Student Confidential that had both the grade A Troma sticker and the even the side label on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And also possibly for this original 80s
Oh,
one
yeah. Yeah.
one sheet
Yeah.
flyer of Student Confidential. So
Right. Right.
anyway,
Nice.
so it's but between that we've all wound up with our favorite treasures from the film. And so you first saw the film, and as you mentioned in the Vanity Project podcast, how it was something at the end of a night of an all-night B movie marathon, and it just always stayed with you seeing
Yeah.
that film. And then fast forward to years later, because the entire podcast is included on the new Severin release, that first conversation with the director Richard Horian about making the film, and when you shared that you were there for what, as your research also found out, to be probably the last time the film was shown theatrically.
Mhm.
Do you recall what his reaction was to being told that that was your first exposure with the film?
Well, you know, I reached out to Richard, first, over email, and I think, I mean, what I discovered later is like no one ever had spoken to him about his movies, ever. No one had ever reached out to him about Student Confidential or this, very elusive second movie he made called Williamstown. And I think he was really flattered that I had reached out to him. And, you know, it was a whole series of, emails with me asking more and more questions. And the email responses I'd get back from Richard would get longer and longer. And then finally I got on the phone with him. And really the sort of ultimate moment in my getting to know Richard was when I flew to his house and got to spend time with him there, because that's where I learned about the fate of these film elements, or at least the fate that he intended for them. But I think Richard was really sort of touched that someone cared about the film, but he also was extremely guarded because, if you look up any review of that movie, they're just brutal. And I think in Richard's mind, just like any filmmaker, he was really trying to reach an audience, with a very sincere effort. And I'm not sure he's able to sort of still even see what this movie he made is. But that's one of the beautiful things about it. That's why it's such a unique film.
It popped up on my radar because as a Troma film with the Troma name on there, what I grew in my age of really beginning to love movies is no matter what you saw of a Troma film, you were seeing a director's fully unfiltered vision.
Yeah.
Like you were
Yeah.
seeing Troma was like, hey, you have this thing, and as Lloyd lovingly refers to it sometimes as the last stop on the train, we'll get your vision out into video stores and movie theaters and con. And watching Student Confidential from the old Media Home Entertainment tape to watching this brand new, beautiful Severin release, the way the camera moves in this movie is not how cameras move in movies.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
such a unique, something, a certain purity to it, a certain, whether when watching it, knowing nothing about who Richard was, knowing nothing of the backstory initially, you think this is either someone who's personally trying to rewrite the rules of cinema or someone who just doesn't know and wound up getting the chance to make a movie and is doing it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the because in the podcast with this film, Student Confidential, and having seen it, thinking it might have been even a fever dream, and then the lengths to go to tracking it down. In the midst of your first few times watching it, did you ever have a thought that this was going to be the or one of the main movies that this is something I'm putting my stake in that I need to show everyone I know?
Well, when I saw it at this all-night movie marathon, this was still in, this is the late 80s. This is in the era when things could be still scarce. Like I didn't know if I was going to be ever, able to see this movie on video back then. And when I tracked down a copy, I made a copy of that and would show it to everyone I knew because there was a sense that, there was something special here that, otherwise, if it wasn't just for my efforts, no one would see this movie. I talk about this in the podcast. I got Michael Weldon to write a review for it in his magazine, Psychotronic Video, but that was like the only thing I'd ever read about it. And I had generated that, so I was like, this, I felt like I was the only person who sort of knew about this thing. And what was really unusual is that when our whole culture changed because of the internet in this century, I would have thought more people would know about this movie. But it remained truly obscure. Not obscure in the way that other movies have been that had never got a sort of video release. In some ways, Troma picking up this totally bizarre film really, as much as maybe Richard would think it was doing it a disservice, it really did it as it did something for the film in that not only did he, put it in theaters, and there was a few people that saw it in theaters, including myself, but there's a VHS release. Apparently, there was a beta release, which I've yet to track down. Um, but it was also one of the Troma movies that was put on DVD in the early 2000s. There was a lot of films that they picked up in the 80s that they didn't put on DVD. And so there was this tiny life for this movie, and the only people that I could see when I would search online who were actually paying attention to it were completists. Were, basically Chaz, the sort of weirdos like you or me who were like, the people who wanted to see every Troma film ever made, or I shouldn't say, because Troma didn't make it, every film that they picked up.
Every film under the
And
Troma banner, everyone with that
yes,
that red and black skyline that fires out. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and there's a real distinction between the films that they made and the films that they acquired, and it's one of the things that when I did, a bunch of research about their acquisitions in the 80s, and there's a on the Blu-ray there's an interview with Lloyd Kaufman that I did in his living room where I sort of quizzed him for it was hours that we cut this thing, down into the 15 minutes or whatever it is on the disc. But they, found so many movies and put these films into theaters. And they were, you were saying that, it's like the unfiltered director's vision. And I think there's a lot of truth to that because Troma acquisitions in the 1980s were some of the strangest movies that you could ever see. And, the reason that they were getting out there is because Troma wouldn't really pay much of any money. And but yet they would see something in these titles that they see as exploitable. And they would put it under the banner of this sort of sarcastic, sort of TNA exploitation banner that, I mean, Troma's sort of brand reminds me of like Mad Magazine or something like that. And actually both, it's the sort of province in some ways of like New York Jews. Like it's just this sort of thing. It's like it was like the staff of Mad Magazine were genuinely funny and sarcastic people that ended up invading the minds of kids with their humor. And I think Troma, in their own sort of way, created this fan base with their own sort of sardonic way of marketing their films. But here's the thing: it's like besides the movies that they made themselves, like Toxic Avenger, there were so many weird movies they would put out, like Story of a Junkie, which was essentially a documentary about the heroin scene in New York in the 80s. That was harrowing, which had like real people shooting up in it and stuff. And then they would do like this a weird sort of black and white quasi art movie called Screenplay, right? This is a film that was never put on DVD. Um, I think the same year that they put Student Confidential in theaters, they put probably seven or maybe 12 other movies that they had acquired, you know? Um, and so they were just vacuuming up all these bizarre films and putting a poster that promised TNA and, you know, and exploitation thrills, but you never knew what you're going to get. And I think that's really, you know, it's one of the magic things about Student Confidential is that the Troma poster almost it promises a like a satire of like 50s juvenile delinquent movies or something. And then you watch the movie and it's this very strangely paced sort of after school special vibe that slowly morphs into something extremely personal from this guy that made it. And now that the movie is sort of getting out there a little bit more, it's been fascinating to actually finally read people actually watching it now and responding to it. And so far, the response has been fantastic. If you go on Letterboxd, which, you know, for anyone watching this, you know, it's a site where people log kind of diary style their movie viewing habits. And the Student Confidential reviews have like slowly been coming in as the Severin release has gotten out there. And it's like, while there are maybe a few people who are just completely baffled by the movie, the majority of people are just sort of blown away by how strange this film is. So yeah, so I went from this journey of you know, discovering this movie and really feeling like literally for decades that there was next to no one who knew about this film other than maybe Troma completists. To now, you know, there is a small new audience opening up for it, and I've talked to Richard, and he really wants to get the movie on streaming, which if this movie actually ends up invading, you know, people's like you know streaming accounts, I don't know what kind of damage it will do to people's minds, you know, like tuning in, but
It will
that might
counsel
be the
them.
future too. Yes, yeah, it'll teach them something about themselves.
Yeah. Well, with this movie then, and we mentioned like with it being released, because the podcast sort of ends with the things getting ready, the wheels in motion for it to happen. What has communication with Richard been like about like his reaction to seeing the final physical release of it and the people coming together for and finally seeing his movie?
Well, I think honestly, Richard, you know, I talk about this in the podcast, you know, he sort of did this in a way as a favor to me because he knew how much I loved this film. And he saw that, you know, this had sort of turned into this mission and, you know, and I get into this in the weeds of the podcast, but, you know, this was a film that if it had been up to him, he would have had eradicated from the face of the earth. You know, he attempted to have all the materials destroyed for the film. And so I think there is a sort of mixed feeling that Richard has about it being out there. But I think it's a mixed feeling in the same way that for it to come out in the first place, I think he was extremely proud of the film, as he should be, because it's remarkable that, you know, he had never not just written a movie before. He had never not directed a movie before. He never edited a film before. He had never scored a film before. He had never acted in his life, and he stars this movie. Like he literally had never acted. He told me that he took a few acting classes when he moved to LA, and he left because he didn't like anyone in the class. You know, like so. I think he was very proud of the fact that he made this film, but also heartbroken at the response to it. So I think that's probably there's some mixture of that's happening now. Um, but at the same time, I think he knows how much this means to me to have it out there. And here's the thing, by the way, like Richard didn't have a Blu-ray player. Like he doesn't like yeah, he watches a lot of streaming stuff. Like he bought a Blu-ray player so he could watch his own movie, you know. And as soon as he got the Severin release, you know, which I have here, which I had them scan the Spanish VHS artwork for this. for this front cover, I should say. He was very impressed with the way that it looked, and of course the transfer. I mean, it comes from the original camera negative. I mean, like it was a complete revelation, and I think when he finally saw it that way, he was blown away. So
That we hear on the podcast his exact reaction to the first time seeing those opening credits. And so after hearing that and then watching the Severin and then going back to the Troma VHS tape, it is fascinating how the only real change to the Troma opening credits is the title.
the
Because
title, yeah,
yeah, because sometimes credits change a lot, like in movies, especially with Troma. That'd be the one things they'd change would be the title or a little thing here or there or the credits. And the old Troma VHS would just you'd see the new logo for Student Confidential, and then it would just go right into the actors' names.
yeah,
Meanwhile, in the version that Richard envisioned, you see just Richard Horian presents or Richard Horian film, The Counselor, the original
yeah,
title, and then it goes back into the credits as we know him. So in
yeah,
even in his original version, there is no directed by or written by in the opening credits. It just
yeah.
sneakily
It's
slides in, and then there's executive producer at the end, and then yeah,
Well, he has, yes, it is interesting. Like in those original credits, like, the first time I saw those, that was stunning. Like, I think when we were opening up the boxes, that we had managed to get from Troma that they had found in one of their warehouses, um, we unspooled one of the trailers, and I saw it's the trailer that says The Counselor on it, and I saw the original title there. I actually have it over here still. Um, and like that was stunning. The font he uses is very much of he finished the film in I think late 1985. That's right around the time the Terminator had been a big hit. I think it's the Terminator font is like what he put that in, which is hilarious because it's like the counselor, right? Um, we had a decision to make whether on the actual scan to use the original title. And that was a call I eventually made. I think Richard sort of went back and forth about it, but I just, I said, look, we should use your original title. This is the movie that you finished. Um, so yeah, I mean, like and the difference between, that VHS, of course, and this scan from the original camera negative, there were so many things that I saw in it that just absolutely blew me away. And I have to say, Chaz, like the whole thing was genuinely weird. Like the guy that I went to the movie marathon with when we were 17 years old, I'm, still friends with and we're in touch. Sending him these images of like that I found the original, like, title of the movie and the 35 millimeter strand of film that says The Counselor. It's just a sort of unlikely thing because this is a film that was meant to be lost, just like so many other movies. And if there wasn't just a series of circumstances, this movie never would have been able to be seen by anyone besides on that old VHS tape. And those things are rotting. Um, so yeah, I feel extremely grateful that all these things lined up to happen, but I'm also always registering just how incredibly surreal this is all that I rescued this movie. So
but you did it. Like that's such a massive. How many people who try to rescue films or these things that stand out that they know how great it is, and then just whether the elements, the loss of time, it doesn't get to happen. But you completely succeeded on the highest level of getting this thing saved. That's a really
yeah, and well, thank you. I mean, but it also, again, like it's sort of like I just so much of it was just pressing Richard, and there were so many moments, and this is all detailed in the podcast where it really seemed like this was never going to happen. The film was never going to come out. Like there was a good solid year where any effort that I made would seem to be thwarted, often directly by Richard, you know. Um, and then, it's funny, it's at the end of the day, um, it's a box sitting in a warehouse, and uncatalogued, just like sitting somewhere. And the founders of Troma will be gone at some point, and the people who take it over, who knows what that'll look like. Like if someone hadn't looked in this warehouse, maybe all that stuff would have been sold to scrap, or we have no idea. And what little I know about the kind of world of film preservation and rescuing films is it's filled with these kind of moments where someone double checks and is like, oh, my first, so I'm a filmmaker. My first feature is called The Pact, and there was a 35 millimeter release of that film. And I was working with some people to actually try to find the original negative for that movie because I just have a print of it. And there was a long time where we couldn't find the original negative. And this is a movie from 2012, right? And then again, same sort of thing, just happenstance that like they called this one laboratory back like a third time, and then someone looked somewhere else and was like, "Oh no, no, I guess we do have it here," you know. So it's just you just never know, where this stuff is. So
It wasn't the 1925 film The Unknown finally found because it was in a cancer that was labeled unknown, and no one thought
is
to
that right?
actually,
I've
yeah,
seen that movie, right? It's on that Criterion. It's a good movie. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's really funny. Exactly, right? It's like if unknown, then that could be like, sold for scrap or something like that. It's like it's like it's hard to say what's more dangerous, something that is in a physical format like that can be mislabeled or misfiled somewhere or just junked because it's taking up too much space, or a digital file that, you're not going to be able to play, or the computer, the hard drive breaks down or something like that. I mean, that is the history of film in so many ways, is it's actually all very delicate.
Right. Yeah, and we're seeing now with it being the 20th anniversary of YouTube just passing and the things that were uploaded 2 decades ago with the thought that, the permeance of the internet, as we were told in the early turn of the millennium, now it's like it's so pixelated and different and all the format changes, it's almost unwatchable, a lot of those.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's all transient. But at the same time, it's like one of the things about, the sort of luxury of the age that we live in right now is this access to all these like sort of incredible things. But yes, ironically, especially with streaming, there's a sense that maybe this stuff it feels even more ephemeral. And again, just to sort of bring it back to Student Confidential, this is a movie that Richard made in 1985. And so when I, first made contact with him, it was like 37 years before he had directed this film, and I was this person who just showed up in his life. And so this was a piece of his past, like I think there were decades where, Richard met, hundreds and hundreds of people who never knew he just, in this other time in his life had directed a feature film that had played like in like theaters all around the country, which is a testament to not only his just will, his sheer determination, as he says, but also how incredibly insecure and weird the film business is. That like it really is this business where if people have a dream, they'll push and push on it. And that's one of the things that we talked about. Like, if there ever was a further season of the Vanity Project podcast, maybe it could be about either a group of films or one film that sort of fit this loose definition of these movies, made by people who had no prior film experience and just by sheer force of will made movies. And there's so many examples of this. The Room is the most kind of famous one. But just, talking to Joe Rubin at Vinegar Syndrome, he's an aficionado of these films. And like one of the first things he did when I told him about Student Confidential is he sent me this email with like, 50 films that he had written down that he's, either seen or himself has rescued, that are movies just made by people who just sometimes spent years of their life making like 35 millimeter feature films. It's fascinating. It's a whole world. So
Yeah, it was to hear about that in the podcast and also the discussion of things like after last season, where it has been a director who successfully, as far as we know, destroyed his original copies of his work. So, as a filmmaker yourself, and knowing that this style of filmmaking sort of exists, this hyper independent auteurship, I guess we could call it.
yeah.
Um, has that and has like working with Richard potentially influenced your upcoming projects or your approach now to filmmaking in any sort of way?
Well, I mean, Richard is just like, he's someone who, and I've realized this in like that he's been working very hard this last year to try to figure out a way to actually rescue his second film, even though he personally destroyed the film elements for that. And
Williamstown,
what I,
the silent
yeah,
film, right? Yeah.
yeah. And that effort where like, I would have these conversations with him and I would say, the negative is gone. All the prints are gone. Like you want to take a VHS quality tape and create something that you could show in a theater. That was what he was trying for. And what I realized was that it was sort of like rationale be damned. Like he was determined that this was something he was going to do. And that is inspirational to me because at the end of the day, like he actually has made lots and lots of money with just these not only these ideas that he has that he becomes fixated, whether they're good or bad, he just doesn't stop and follows them through. And that's something that's rare. And that has been inspirational to me because really in my own career as a filmmaker, it's the same thing. It's like there have been so many times when the entire world is telling me to stop doing this because you're not getting paid or the thing has fallen apart for the fifth time or or whatever it is, but you just have to stick to it if it's something that you believe in. And Richard, yes, so I mean that is how Richard influences me on a daily basis. He's an inspiration in that way.
Cool. So finally, with Student Confidential back in the world the way it was meant to be seen, restored, what do you hope people get from seeing this hyper-moral tale of a counselor guiding 17-year-olds as he counsels himself through his own life in a way that only Richard could have presented on the big screen in 1985?
Well, two things. Like number one, I just want people to understand this movie exists. That was sort of Project A because it was a movie that was teetering on the edge of extinction, right? And that's good enough. But the other thing that I would want people to take from is hopefully what I get into in the podcast and in the extras on the Blu-ray that I produced, which is that, you know, um, all films, I think, in some ways are, a testament to the people that make them. Sometimes by accident, they're personal. Sometimes by intention, they're personal. But that this movie is unlike most films because there's something really naked in the way it's presented. This guy who's starring in this film, who wrote, directed, produced, edited, scored, it really is a sort of exorcism. And I would hope that people, as loony as the movie is, and as bizarre as it is, unintentionally, um, that they would see that there's something really touching here, as this person is sort of expressing themselves in a way that is entirely unique to any other movie that I've really ever seen. And so I would hope they would see the sort of they would have this sort of Reese's peanut butter cup experience that I have with the movie, which is a combination of just being sheerly entertained because of how strange the movie is, but also touched at how humane it is, and the person at the heart of this who made this movie. I mean, I think it's a special movie. There are lots of other special movies too that are at the probably at the point of extinction as well. But I was just happy to sort of get this one out there. But certainly reading some of the new reviews as they've been coming up, people really actually seem to be responding to it in that same way, where they say there's something important about what we're seeing here with this movie. So that's gratifying.
Well, thank you so much for your time here and for saving the film. The great Nicholas McCarthy, the guy who has brought us Student Confidential, finally available for the first time in decades and like you've never seen it before from Severin. I'm Chaz Kangas for Speak Minneapolis.